seemed to be gorged.
Gorged? On my grain? Kirk, I am going to hold you responsible.
And then there are shows like Star Trek. It ran for only 3 seasons on NBC, canceled in 1969 with no fanfare, and somehow became one of the most enduring things in the history of American television. Today, 60 years after it first aired, we're looking at the people who made it what it was. This is Star Trek, 1966, cast. A little background. Star Trek premiered on NBC on September 8, 1966, created by writer and producer Gene Roddenberry. The show followed the crew of the USS Enterprise, a starship on a 5-year mission to explore the galaxy in the 23rd century. It ran for 3 seasons and 79 episodes before NBC canceled it in 1969 due to low ratings. What happened next was unlike almost anything else in broadcast history. The show didn't die. It went into syndication and found the enormous audience that had never quite found it during its original run. By the mid-1970s, Star Trek had become a cultural phenomenon with a deeply devoted following. Conventions drew tens of thousands of fans. Merchandise flooded the market. The cast became celebrities of a very particular kind, beloved in ways they hadn't been when the cameras were actually rolling. The franchise was revived as a feature film series beginning in 1979 and continued through 6 films with the original cast, ending with Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country in 1991. It spawned multiple television series, rebooted films, and a legacy that is still generating new content today. For most of the original cast, the Enterprise became the defining thing, the role that would follow them, in some cases embrace them, and in others become something they had to wrestle with. The core ensemble was a remarkably diverse group for 1960s American television, and that was entirely intentional. Gene Roddenberry wanted the crew to look like what he imagined the future could actually be. A Russian navigator during the Cold War, a Japanese-American helmsman, a black woman at the communications console. The show's vision of an integrated, cooperative humanity wasn't naive. It was a statement. And the cast understood what they were part of. Here is what became of each of them. William Shatner, Captain James T. Kirk. William Shatner was born on March 22, 1931, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, into a Jewish family of Eastern European descent. His father manufactured clothing. His mother taught elocution. He began acting as a child, performing in radio productions for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and appearing in the Montreal Children's Theatre. Despite his early love for performance, he enrolled at McGill University and graduated in 1952 with a degree in commerce, a concession to practicality that he quickly abandoned when he joined the National Repertory Theatre of Ottawa. His classical training led him to the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Ontario, where he worked under the renowned director Sir Tyrone Guthrie. In 1956, he made his Broadway debut in Tamburlaine the Great, also directed by Guthrie, and returned to Broadway in The World of Susie Wong for a 2-year run. His film debut came in 1958 in The Brothers Karamazov, alongside Yul Brynner. Through the early 1960s, he built a steady career in television, appearing on The Twilight Zone, The Outer Limits, and The Man from UNCLE, among many others. When he was cast as Captain James T. Kirk in 1966, he was a working actor with genuine range and classical credentials, not the star that role would eventually make him. Kirk, the swaggering, decisive commanding officer of the Enterprise, fit him like a glove. The character was direct where Spock was measured, emotional where logic prevailed elsewhere, and Shatner played him with enormous physical energy and charm. After Star Trek was canceled in 1969, the years that followed were lean. His first marriage to actress Gloria Rand fell apart not long after the show ended, and for a time he was genuinely struggling, living out of a pickup truck camper while taking whatever work came his way. The B-movie circuit, guest spots on other shows, dinner theater. It was a difficult decade. Then came the revival. Star Trek, the motion picture. In 1979 brought the crew back together, and the subsequent films, particularly Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan in 1982, widely considered the finest of the franchise, re-established the cast as genuine stars. Shatner reprised Kirk in 7 feature films altogether, and his final appearance in the role came in Star Trek Generations in 1994, in which Kirk dies. He also starred as the tough, wisecracking police officer T.J. Hooker on the television series of the same name from 1982 to 1986, and later found a late career renaissance playing the brash attorney Denny Crane on Boston Legal from 2004 to 2008, winning 2 Emmy Awards and a Golden Globe for the role. In October 2021, at the age of 90, Shatner flew into space aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard spacecraft, becoming the oldest person ever to do so, a moment of real-life adventure that even Kirk might have appreciated. He has also written extensively, including the memoir Leonard, My 50-Year Friendship with a Remarkable Man in 2016, a tribute to his closest co-star and lifelong friend, Leonard Nimoy. As of 2026, William Shatner is 95 years old and remains one of the most recognizable figures in entertainment history. Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock. Leonard Nimoy was born on March 26, 1931 in Boston, Massachusetts, to Max and Dora Nimoy, Ukrainian Jewish immigrants who ran a barbershop. He grew up in the West End neighborhood of Boston in a tenement, where he first found the stage at the Elizabeth Peabody House Community Center at the age of 8 in a production of Hansel and Gretel. He was captivated from that moment. At 18, he left Boston for California to pursue acting, studying briefly at the Pasadena Playhouse. He spent much of the 1950s picking up small, often uncredited roles in films and television, westerns, genre pictures, whatever was available, while teaching acting classes to support himself. He served in the Army Reserve, where he rose to the rank of sergeant and used his time to direct and write radio programs for troops. He was, by all accounts, serious and determined, even when the work was scarce. When he was cast as Spock, the half-human, half-Vulcan first officer of the Enterprise, the only character retained from the show's original unaired pilot, he created something genuinely new in American television. Spock's emotional restraint, his commitment to logic, his quiet dignity in the face of a world that often regarded him as alien. These qualities resonated with audiences in ways that nobody anticipated. Nimoy received 3 Emmy nominations for the role. He was also the only member of the cast to have appeared in the show's original pilot episode, The Cage. The relationship he had with his own Jewish immigrant background gave him a particular affinity for the character. He has spoken about how Spock's experience as an outsider, belonging neither fully to Vulcan nor to humanity, felt personally familiar. It was not merely a performance, it was something more connected to his own sense of identity. After the cancellation of Star Trek, he joined the cast of Mission Impossible for 2 seasons and kept working steadily. He also directed 2 of the Star Trek films, The Search for Spock in 1984 and The Voyage Home in 1986, and directed the massive mainstream hit 3 Men and a Baby in 1987. He reprised Spock in the rebooted Star Trek films of 2009 and 2013, passing something of the character on to a new generation. Beyond acting, he was a photographer, publishing several books of photographs including Shekinah in 2002 and the Full Body Project in 2007. He was a poet, a songwriter, a narrator. He donated $1 million toward the renovation of the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles. He was, in every sense, a person who refused to be defined by a single thing. In January 2015, Nimoy publicly announced that he had been diagnosed with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, which he attributed to decades of smoking, a habit he had given up 30 years earlier. He used his platform to advocate for others to quit. His final tweet, posted 4 days before his death, read, "A life is like a garden. Perfect moments can be had, but not preserved, except in memory." Leonard Nimoy died on February 27, 2015, at his home in Bel Air, Los Angeles, from end-stage COPD. He was 83 years old. He was buried at Hillside Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. DeForest Kelley, Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy. DeForest Kelley was born Jackson. DeForest Kelley on January 20th, 1920, in Atlanta, Georgia. His father was a Baptist minister, and the family moved frequently throughout Georgia before settling in Decatur. As a child, Kelley sang solo gospel songs in his father's congregation on Sunday mornings. He trained his voice and his ear for performance from the time he was very young, and by his teens, he was performing on Atlanta radio. After high school, he traveled to Long Beach, California, to visit an uncle. He was spotted by a Paramount talent scout while working on a United States Navy training film during World War II. The studio put him under contract, and he built a career, primarily in westerns, and primarily as the villain. He appeared in John Sturgis's Gunfight at the OK Corral in 1957, in which he played Morgan Earp, and in a number of other notable westerns throughout the decade. Gene Roddenberry had worked with him earlier in 1964 and had him specifically in mind for Star Trek when the show went to series. As Dr. Leonard McCoy, Kelley created the moral heart of the show's central trio. Where Kirk acted and Spock reasoned, McCoy felt, deeply, sometimes furiously, always humanely. He was the crew's physician, its conscience, and its most reliably emotional voice. He was also, by every account from those who knew him, the closest thing to his own character that any actor on the show managed, universally liked by his co-stars, and the only one, reportedly, with whom nobody ever had a genuine conflict. Gene Roddenberry had originally offered Kelley the role of Spock, which he declined. It is difficult to imagine the show with a different arrangement. After the show was canceled, Kelley suffered typecasting. His only non-Trek film role after 1969 was in the 1972 horror film Night of the Lepus, a movie about giant mutant rabbits, which tells you something about the kinds of options that were available to him. He reprised McCoy in all 6 original cast films from 1979 to 1991 and made a memorable cameo as a 137-year-old Admiral McCoy in the pilot episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation in 1987. He received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1991. Kelley and his wife Carolyn Dowling had married in 1945. They exchanged 25-cent Indian rings at the ceremony, and they remained together for the rest of his life, living quietly in Sherman Oaks, California, with no children. He was, by all accounts, deeply content with his life and his legacy, even when that legacy was narrower than his talent warranted. He once reflected that his proudest achievement was the number of people who had become doctors because of Dr. McCoy, a sentiment that said everything about who he was. DeForest Kelley died on June 11, 1999, of stomach cancer at his home in Woodland Hills, Los Angeles. He was 79 years old. He was the first of the principal Star Trek cast to pass away, and the only one not to survive into the 21st century. Nichelle Nichols, Lieutenant Uhura, Nichelle Nichols was born Grace Dell Nichols on December 28, 1932, in Robbins, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago. She was the third of 6 children. Her father was a factory worker who also served as the town's mayor and chief magistrate. She began performing as a teenager, singing and dancing in Chicago before eventually touring with the bands of Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton. She had a 4-octave vocal range and the stage presence to match. Her acting career developed through the early 1960s, and it was through an episode of Gene Roddenberry's earlier television series, The Lieutenant in 1964, that she first crossed paths with the man who would cast her as Lieutenant Nyota Uhura in Star Trek 2 years later. Her role was a landmark. In the mid-1960s, Black women on American primetime television were typically cast as domestic workers with minimal screen time. Uhura sat on the bridge of the Enterprise as the ship's communications officer, not in the background, not in a subservient role, but as a central figure in a command crew. Whoopi Goldberg has described the impact Uhura had on her as a child. Dr. Mae Jemison, the first Black woman to travel in space, has cited Uhura as a direct inspiration. Nichols nearly left the show after the first season, feeling the role was too limited. She was talked out of it by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who personally told her how much her presence on the show meant and urged her to stay. She did. In 1968, she and William Shatner were part of what is widely regarded as the first interracial kiss depicted on American scripted network television in the episode Plato's Stepchildren. After the series ended, she channeled her celebrity into something concrete. Beginning in 1977, she worked with NASA on a recruitment drive to bring women and people of color into the astronaut program. The campaign was a significant success. Among those recruited in NASA's 1978 class were Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, Guion Bluford, the first African American in space, Judith Resnick and Ronald McNair, who would both later perish in the 1986 Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, and Charles Bolden, who would go on to serve as NASA administrator. Nichols continued this work until 2015. In 2021, a documentary about her NASA work, Woman in Motion, was released. She also continued to make appearances at Star Trek conventions and remained a beloved figure within the fan community. Nichelle Nichols died of heart failure on July 30th, 2022 in Silver City, New Mexico. She was 89 years old. Her ashes were subsequently launched into deep space. George Takei, Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu. George Takei was born Hosato Takei on April 20th, 1937 in Los Angeles, California. His parents were Japanese Americans, his mother born in Sacramento, his father born in Japan. When George was 5 years old, his family's life was upended by Executive Order 9066, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt in February 1942 following the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Takei family was among the 120,000 Japanese Americans forcibly removed from their homes and relocated to internment camps. They spent time at the Rower War Relocation Center in Arkansas and later at the Harsher Tool Lake Segregation Center in Northern California, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. George was between the ages of 5 and 8 for that period of his life. The family returned to Los Angeles after the war with nothing. They rebuilt slowly. Takei studied architecture at UC Berkeley before transferring to UCLA to study theater, eventually earning both a bachelor's and a master's degree. An advertisement in a Japanese community newspaper led to voiceover work dubbing Japanese monster films into English, his first professional acting work. When he was cast as Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu in 1966, the role was quietly significant. Asian American men on American television were typically presented as villains, servants, or comedy relief. Sulu was an intelligent, capable, dignified officer, none of the demeaning stereotypes that had defined those roles before. Takei understood exactly what the part meant, not just as entertainment, but as representation. After Star Trek, he worked steadily in television and film throughout the 1970s and 1980s, reprised Sulu in all 6 original cast films, and was promoted to captain of the USS Excelsior in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, in 1991. He voiced the character for the animated Star Trek series and appeared in a Voyager episode in 1996. In 2005, he publicly came out as gay after decades of keeping his relationship with Brad Altman private. He and Altman married on September 14, 2008, at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. Brad later changed his surname to Takei. Takei became a vocal and highly effective advocate for LGBTQ rights and for acknowledgement of Japanese American internment. He co-wrote the graphic memoir, They Called Us Enemy, in 2019, a first-hand account of the internment years, and developed the Broadway musical Allegiance, in which he starred, drawing directly from his family's experiences. He has also become a remarkable presence on social media, using humor and directness to reach millions of people on issues of human rights and equality. As of 2026, George Takei is 89 years old and remains an active public voice. James Doohan, Montgomery, Scotty Scott. James Doohan was born James Montgomery Doohan on March 3, 1920, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. His parents had emigrated from Bangor, County Down, in Northern Ireland, and his father, a pharmacist, veterinarian, and dentist, was an alcoholic whose behavior made for a difficult childhood. Doohan left home at 19 to join the Canadian Army. He saw action on D-Day, June 6, 1944, landing on Juno Beach as a captain with the 14th Field Artillery Regiment. He made it ashore, but that night was struck by friendly fire, machine-gunned by a nervous Canadian sentry. 4 bullets hit his legs, 1 severed his right middle finger, and 1 struck a silver cigarette case in his breast pocket. The cigarette case saved his life. He lost the finger and had it written out of most of his Star Trek appearances, though sharp-eyed viewers can occasionally spot its absence. After the war, he trained as an actor in New York, attending the neighborhood playhouse alongside, among others, future actor Leslie Nielsen. He built a career in Canadian radio, appearing in an estimated 4,000 programs, before moving to Hollywood and beginning television work in the late 1950s. When he auditioned for Star Trek in 1965, he tried 7 different accents for the role of the chief engineer. Gene Roddenberry asked which Doohan preferred, and he replied that in his experience, the best engineers were Scotsmen. The accent was based on someone he had met in Aberdeen while stationed in England during the war, a man whose dialect he had initially found entirely incomprehensible. He named the character after his grandfather, Montgomery Scott. He also played a role in shaping the Star Trek universe that extended well beyond his character. He created the basic sounds and the first words of the Klingon and Vulcan languages as heard in Star Trek, the motion picture. After Star Trek, he found himself deeply typecast, but accepted it with considerable grace. His interactions with fans, particularly the story of a young woman struggling with suicidal thoughts, whom he quietly befriended and supported through Star Trek conventions over many years, have become part of the show's folk history. He appeared in all 7 original cast films, the last live-action appearance being in Star Trek Generations in 1994. He received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in August 2004 at what would be his final public appearance. He had been diagnosed with both Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease the previous month. James Doohan died on July 20, 2005, at his home in Redmond, Washington, from complications of Alzheimer's disease and pneumonia. He was 85 years old. A portion of his ashes was later launched into space. Walter Koenig, Ensign Pavel Chekhov. Walter Koenig was born on September 14, 1936 in Chicago, Illinois, to Russian Jewish immigrant parents who had come from Lithuania. He grew up in the Inwood neighborhood of Manhattan, attending Fieldston High School in Riverdale, New York. He studied pre-medicine at Grinnell College in Iowa before transferring to UCLA, where he earned a degree in psychology. He then trained as an actor at the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York, the same school Doohan had attended, where his classmates included James Caan, Dabney Coleman, and Elizabeth Ashley. He joined the Star Trek cast in the second season in 1967 as Ensign Pavel Chekhov. The addition was deliberate. Gene Roddenberry wanted a younger cast member to broaden the show's appeal to teenagers, and Koenig's resemblance to Davy Jones of the Monkees was specifically noted. The inclusion of a Russian character during the height of the Cold War was also, by design, a statement. The same multicultural, cooperative crew that made the show a quiet act of optimism week after week. There was also, reportedly, a more pointed reason for the Russian addition. The Soviet newspaper Pravda had complained that Star Trek failed to include a Russian character despite the Soviet Union's prominent role in the space race. Whether Roddenberry was directly responding to that criticism or simply found it a convenient justification for a decision he had already made, the result was the same. Chekhov took his place at the navigation console and stayed there. Koenig was, notably, the only member of the original cast not to provide voices for the 1973 animated Star Trek series due to budget constraints. He did, however, write an episode for it, The Infinite Vulcan, making him the first cast member to write a Star Trek story for television. It was an early sign of a creative ambition that would run alongside his acting career for the rest of his professional life. Outside Star Trek, he built a significant second career as Alfred Bester on the television series Babylon 5, a recurring antagonist whose moral complexity gave Koenig the chance to do something quite different from the earnest, occasionally comic Chekhov. He was the top choice of 12,000 internet voters for their favorite television villain in a 1997 online poll. He has also worked as a writer for multiple television series, directed plays on the Los Angeles stage, and written an autobiography, Warped Factors, A Neurotic's Guide to the Universe, published in 1998. In it, he wrote with unusual candor about the psychological cost of typecasting, the complicated feelings that came with being defined by a single role, and the years of self-doubt that ran beneath a career that looked, from the outside, far more settled than it felt from within. In 2012, he became the final member of the original Star Trek cast to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In 2023, he voiced a character in Star Trek, Picard, not Chekhov himself, but Chekhov's son Anton, named by Koenig in tribute to Anton Yelchin, who had played the younger Chekhov in the J.J. Abrams reboot films before his death in 2016. It was a graceful way to close a loop, honoring a young actor gone too soon while quietly passing something of the character forward into the next generation of the franchise. As of 2026, Walter Koenig is 89 years old. 60 years is a long time for anything to last. For a television show that was canceled after 3 seasons with mediocre ratings, the endurance of Star Trek is nothing short of extraordinary. But looking at the people who made it, it becomes a little easier to understand why. They were not simply actors playing roles on a science fiction set. They were a group of people from Georgia and Boston and Montreal and Los Angeles and Vancouver, from Canada and Japan and the American South and the immigrant neighborhoods of Chicago and New York, who found themselves part of something that quietly spoke to what people wanted the future to be. A world without war between nations, without the old prejudices, without the hierarchies of race or origin. A crew bound by purpose and by genuine respect for one another. Some of them carried that vision forward in their real lives. Nichelle Nichols dedicating years of her time to NASA. George Takei spending decades fighting for the rights and dignity of groups the culture had ignored. Leonard Nimoy channeling his artistry into photography, poetry, and advocacy for Holocaust remembrance. Some of them bore the burden of a single defining role more heavily than others. Some made peace with it. Some, like DeForest Kelley, wore it as something close to a gift, finding in Dr. McCoy's impact on generations of aspiring doctors a legacy worth more than any award. And some of them, against all odds, are still here, still recognized on the street, still turning up at conventions, still answering for the enterprise and what she stood for. If you enjoyed this look back, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It makes a real difference and helps us keep making videos like this one. Leave a comment below and let us know which cast member's story stayed with you the most. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you in the next one.